Tonight on Bridge City News, the latest poll numbers are out, and it does not look good for Rachel Notley and the NDP. Premier Notley and UCP leader Jason Kenney were both out protesting a couple of anti-energy bills. And we hear from a local business owner who shares his concerns heading into the provincial election.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Roberts.
Good evening. Thanks so much for joining us. The Alberta election is less than a week away, and the latest polls say we could see a UCP majority. Jason Kenney's party continues to hold a large lead over Rachel Notley and the NDP. The latest aggregate of the most recent polls puts the UCP at 48.5% support, while the NDP is at 37.8%. The Alberta Party has garnered 8.5% support, and the Liberals are a distant fourth at just 2.1%. If the election was held today, the UCP would win between 57 and 72 seats, which would put the party clear of the 44-seat threshold required for a majority of government. The NDP is projected to win between 15 and 29 seats. The Alberta Party is in the running for 1 seat. Now, when it comes to the big cities, the NDP leads in Edmonton with 46.8% support, compared to 40.1% for the UCP. In Calgary, however, the UCP leads with 47.4% support compared to the NDP's 38.2%. When it comes to smaller cities like Lethbridge and rural Alberta, the UCP is way ahead of the NDP with 58.2% support. The NDP only has 28.3%. If there was an opening for the NDP to close the gap, it was last week's leadership debate in Edmonton. But according to Forum Research, Main Street Research, and Think HQ, Jason Kenney was the clear winner of that debate. More than 170,000 elementary, intermediate, and high school students will be participating in a mock election through Student Vote Alberta. In total, more than 1,340 schools have registered to participate. Students will take on the roles of election officers and cast ballots for the official candidates who are running in their electoral division. Most schools will be voting on April the 15th. Student Vote Alberta is a program of Civics, which is a national civic education charity that focuses on engaging young people to become more active in their communities.
Student Vote is a mock vote program for students who are under the actual voting age. So in Alberta and throughout Canada, the voting age is 18. So our project is aimed at students who are under 18, grade 4, and grade 12, which is about the ages of 8 to 17. So our project is basically an opportunity for those students who, even though they can't vote for real yet, gives them an opportunity to kind of get engaged.
Civics President Taylor Gunn says with 75% of schools participating, it is the largest student vote program ever held in Alberta. A federal bill to change the way Ottawa assesses major energy projects is not going over very well in Calgary. Many in the oil and gas industry are demanding major changes to Bill C-69, with many chanting, "Kill that bill." UCP leader Jason Kenney joined the protest. NDP leader Rachel Notley, meanwhile, spoke to reporters about another bill, C-48, which is the oil tanker bill she wants to see scrapped.
C-48 is a bit of a different kettle of fish. At this point, it is just such a blunt tool. I think they just got to pull the whole thing back and figure out a better way to get at what they're trying to achieve.
What did we get from Mr. Trudeau? Within 3 days of him taking office, he surrendered to a presidential veto on Keystone XL. And then he killed the approved Northern Gateway pipeline. And then he killed Energy East with his new regulations. And now he's imposing a tanker ban, not on OPEC dictator oil, bringing dictator oil into Canada, but on tankers that would take ethically produced Alberta oil to global markets. And now his Bill C-69, his No More Pipelines Act, which means that no one will propose another pipeline or major energy infrastructure project.
We have the Alberta provincial election coming up on April 16th, and this October we have the federal one. Now, apparently we may see more foreign interference leading up to the fall election. That's according to our political reporter, Brian Lilly.
We had foreign interference in the last federal election. It helped the Liberals win. It's called groups like the Tides Foundation and the Oaks Foundation funding places like Lead Now and the Dogwood Initiative. Lead Now says they targeted 29 ridings held by the Conservatives and wanted to flip them to Liberal or NDP. They claim they were successful in 25 of them. They were taking foreign money in the lead up to the election campaign. So don't tell me there wasn't foreign interference last time.
Mr. Lilly will also have more details on why Tory leader Andrew Scheer wants Justin Trudeau to sue him. That's coming up after business news. Seniors, youth, business owners, and farmers all have different needs from the government. Video journalist Naveen Day visited a cattle rancher recently to hear what his concerns are heading into next week's provincial election.
Just outside of Lethbridge, I visited Harvest Haven, an organic farm and wellness store. The manager, Martin Van Popta, says far too often people go to the polls only thinking of themselves.
I see a bunch of ugly politicians, and they're just baiting people, whether it's with a vaccination policy or a transgender policy or some self-righteous environmental policy that doesn't attach to reality. It's just political baiting, and then people just voting based on whatever issue they think is the most important or beneficial for them. But there isn't an actual concern for holistic reality.
While Van Popta did not say who he feels should win the election, he did have some criticism of the current NDP government, particularly with Rachel Notley.
She is a spiteful person who has absolutely zero interest in this province. She has political issues, political points, if you'd call them that she wants to achieve for her own sake, for her own reputation, but I don't believe that woman cares about this province or the individuals living in it for 1 second.
For Bridge City News, I'm Naveen Day.
The mercury is climbing, which means more people will be riding their bicycles. Now, did you know it's against the law in Lethbridge to ride your bicycle without a license? Yes, you heard that right. Bicycle Bylaw 3515, which was last amended in 1986, says a police officer can seize a bike that does not have a plate.
So the bicycle bylaw is originally from I believe the 1970s and last updated in 1986. We were looking at updating the bicycle bylaw to bring it into alignment with more common practices today and to remove some aspects of the bylaw that aren't really enforceable. For example, the existing bylaw requires us to have bicycle licenses, and to the best of my knowledge, we don't have anywhere in the city that'll provide you that. We're looking to incorporate some updated definitions for what a bicycle is. We've seen e-bikes coming along these days, and we have to make sure that they're properly integrated within our bylaws. We also have to talk about some of the newer cycling infrastructure, for example, bike lanes, and how those are going to work within the city. So those are two examples of what we will be updating and trying to include in this bylaw.
Aggie Days is back at Exhibition Park for a 13th straight year. Students were able to participate in everything from petting goats and horses to a milking demonstration. Ainsley O'Reilly gives us an inside look into some of the events for 2019.
At Aggie Days, there's something for everybody. As a main sponsor, U of A is passionate about connecting the agricultural industry with younger generations.
We are really just excited about having kids come down here and experience what it's like to interact with the animals. We teach about farm safety, and we also teach a little bit about where food comes from. We're really pleasantly surprised with how interactive the kids actually are. They have a ton of questions, but they actually have a lot of base of knowledge for this as well. So that's kind of exciting. It really shows how these events really foster that education. So we're really pleased about that.
With 45 exhibitors, Southern Alberta was well represented, with everything from a wool spinning demonstration to a milking demo.
She did put her foot in the pail, but at least she didn't kick me, which was positive.
Everyone involved agreed on the importance of teaching youth about one of the world's most crucial industries.
Well, you'd be surprised. Most of the kids here haven't been around agriculture that much, and that's why we put on things like this. And it's a neat opportunity for them to get to come and pet a horse, so they get to enjoy being around the animals and horses, and it's my life, and I'm glad I get to share it.
It's really important to know where your food comes from. That's the most important thing. And a lot of children or people don't know that milk comes from cows. They think it comes from the grocery store, and it's really important for them to know that it comes from cows.
In its 13th year, Aggie Days is about education, bringing food from the farm to the plate. This year, they had 2,300 students registered, which is more than in the last 5 years. For Bridge City News, I'm Ainsley O'Reilly.
If you live on the west end in Lethbridge, your drive will be impacted tomorrow. Starting at 9 a.m., the eastbound lane along Bridge Drive West will be closed so crews can work on streetlights in the area. It'll impact traffic turning onto this road from University Drive West. It should be completed later in the afternoon. 4 more drug dealers have been taken off the streets in Brooks. Medicine Hat police busted the dealers earlier this week with the help of the Brooks RCMP. Investigators also seized 227 grams of cocaine with a street value of almost $23,000, along with 1 fentanyl pill. 41-year-old Scott Hancock, 32-year-old Adam McGuire, 48-year-old Lewel Dang, and 18-year-old Damon Clark have been charged with various offenses, including drug trafficking. A national security watchdog is calling for stricter controls on the Canadian military spying. A recent report says our national defense and Canadian armed forces have some of the largest intelligence programs in Canada, and they get very little outside scrutiny. Canada's defense minister says he will look closely at the recommendations.
This will allow us to take a look at the reasonings behind this. We also have to take a look at the current processes that are in place. Plus, we also have to take a look at. The operational needs of the Canadian Armed Forces, because our defense intelligence is there to making sure that our Canadian soldiers stay safe on operations. We have to take a look at the full continuum of what the Canadian Armed Forces are doing. When we put out the defense policy, as we stated, we're looking at all from high-intensity conflict all the way down to peacekeeping and even domestic operations. So we need to make sure that any changes that we make allows for flexibility within our system, so that if we ever are in a high-intensity conflict, are the Canadian Armed Forces able to function in a manner that can protect our soldiers and also be effective.
Firefighters in British Columbia have had to deal with new wildfires which have broken out. The same can be said for residents in Palm Springs, California. Authorities had to evacuate people from more than 20 homes as a wildfire raged near the Desert Sun area. The wind and fire knocked out power to more than 1,000 homes in Palm Springs. Fortunately, most of the fire has now been put out and many have been allowed to return to their homes. Now here's something you don't see every day. Surveillance video from eastern Pennsylvania shows train cars toppling over. Police said the Delaware Railroad train was carrying lumber and sand used for fracking. The train came off the tracks around noon yesterday. Fortunately, there were no injuries, but police say traffic was disrupted for quite some time. Nearly a month after a cyclone swept through Mozambique, causing great devastation, searches for victims' bodies are still continuing.
We know 9 family members were swept from there, from what we're told, from that direction. They were swept here towards, I think it's the Masapa River. We had found some remains. There's a number of different elements and a number of broken bones, what we think is largely due to scavenging. So we've recovered each and every element that we can see. Normally we'd do a very thorough search of this whole area, but we just don't have the time to do that. We move from scene to scene. We've collected what we think is obvious and what we can find, and then it's time to give it back to the local authorities and organize a burial.
This is the 25th anniversary of the Rwandan genocide, a dark time in our history when over 800,000 people were killed in the space of just 100 days. The slaughter left so many reeling and hurting even today, which is more than 2 decades later. Alison Alley is with Compassion Canada. Her Christian organization has been helping out in Rwanda, and she says it's so important to help those who are feeling most vulnerable.
I think for us as Canadians to recognize that we have been given much, and God calls us to have a spirit of generosity to help those who may not have what we have. So I would encourage every Canadian to do their part to help those who are living in poverty and those who are still dealing with the ramifications of the genocide. As I said, by either sponsoring a child or donating specifically to the trauma care.
Catch my full interview with Alison Alley, talking more about the 25th anniversary of the Rwanda genocide. That's coming up in the second half of our show. Scientists have revealed the first image ever made of a black hole. Astronomers assembled data gathered by 8 radio telescopes around the world to show the violent neighborhood near a supermassive black hole.
The best idea we have of what they can look like come from simulations like this. The infalling gas that's superheated lights up a ring of light where photons orbit the black hole. And interior to that is a dark patch where the event horizon itself prevents light from escaping. In April of 2017, all the dishes in the Event Horizon Telescope swiveled, turned, and stared at a galaxy 55 million light years away. It's called Messier 87 or M87. And there's a supermassive black hole at its core. And we are delighted to be able to report to you today that we have seen what we thought was unseeable. We have seen and taken a picture of a black hole. Here it is.
It was on this day that peace talks conclude in Northern Ireland with the Good Friday Agreement. The Titanic sets sail and comedian Sam Kinison is killed. This is Today in History for April the 10th.
April 10th, 1998. In Northern Ireland, peace talks conclude with a landmark deal aimed at ending 30 years of bitter rivalries and bloody attacks. Negotiators signed the Good Friday Agreement, calling for power sharing between Protestants and Catholics in the troubled region. 1912, the Titanic set sail from Southampton, England, on its maiden voyage across the Atlantic Ocean. That journey ends in tragedy just days later when the British luxury liner sinks after hitting an iceberg. 1925, F. Scott Fitzgerald's The Great Gatsby, a novel about the American dream during the Roaring '20s, is first published. And 1992.
What did I do to my life?
Raunchy comedian Sam Kinison is killed when a pickup truck hits his car on a California highway. Kinison was 38 years old. Today in history, April 10th. Sandy Kozel, The Associated Press.
The Stanley Cup playoffs get underway tonight. 3 Canadian teams qualified for the postseason this year. The Toronto Maple Leafs, the Winnipeg Jets, who take on the Blues tonight, and the Calgary Flames, who open their series at home tomorrow night against the Colorado Avalanche. Flames head coach Bill Peters says his team is ready for a deep playoff run.
We don't see any pressure. I don't know where the pressure is coming from. We don't feel the pressure if there is any, but the opportunity to play in the postseason is exciting. And Lonnie talks about it, and I've read a couple of the things he said where he's talking about the clock's ticking. You want to win. You want to get deep into the playoffs. You want to win a Stanley Cup at some point in your career. So why not try and get it done as soon as you can, which is now. The opportunity is right there in front of us.
We're hungry to win. We got guys that will lay it on the line for each other, and they've done that all year. So. We don't have the most playoff experience, but we'll help with that in different areas, and I like the way our team's built.
Really excited to get the playoffs. Obviously, the past 2 times we were there, we haven't had too much success other than my first year there, we won a round. But this year I think we're pushing to go really deep here, and most of the guys in this locker room are expecting that.
The last time a Canadian team won the Stanley Cup, it was the Montreal Canadiens in 1993. It feels more like baseball than hockey weather outside. Nice and mild again today. But will that continue? I'll have complete weather details coming up shortly. Not a bad spring-like day in Lethbridge. We almost hit double digits today. Tonight, partly cloudy with a low near +1. Tomorrow, a few clouds developing with a high near 11. Friday, mainly sunny but cooling off to 5 degrees. A gorgeous weekend is shaping up. Sunshine and 13 for both Saturday and Sunday. A low-pressure system returns on Monday, bringing cloud showers and a high of only 10. A mixture of sun and cloud, and 11 for Tuesday. Checking the almanac, the average high for this time of year is 12 degrees and an average low of -2. The highest temperature on this date was recorded in 1949 at 24 degrees, and the record low was -19 in 1990. Sunrise was at 6:50, sunset at 8:15. Looking at tomorrow's national forecast now, Victoria will have periods of rain and 10. Vancouver will also have showers and 9. Light rain and 9 is expected in Calgary as well tomorrow. Edmonton will have rain and 10 degrees. It'll be mainly sunny and 4 in Regina. Partly cloudy and 5 for Saskatoon. Sunshine and 4 for Winnipeg on Thursday. A chance of flurries and only 3 degrees for Toronto. Ottawa will be mainly sunny and 7. Montreal will have sunshine as well and 5 degrees. Lots of sunshine and 9 for Fredericton. Halifax will have snow mixed with rain and a high near 8. Charlottetown will be partly cloudy and 5, and in St. John's, Newfoundland, expect rain mixed with snow and a high near 4 tomorrow. The Canadian Federation of Agriculture is gearing up for the federal election in October. It has launched a nonpartisan strategy called Producing Prosperity that aims to keep farm issues on the front burner during the campaign. The message is that agri-food sector has the potential to be the most significant economic engine in Canada. Along with economic growth, the Federation is also highlighting food security. The group says the campaign will request support of the agri-food industry from all political parties leading up to the October vote. Farmers in Saskatchewan are calling on Ottawa to quickly resolve the canola trade dispute with China. The Commons Agriculture Committee has heard from farmers who say they're facing a perfect storm of trade disputes. They say there are problems with China over canola, Italy with durum wheat, and India with Canadian-grown pulse crops. Some farmers are asking for a cash advance that would help until the disputes are resolved. Officials with the Canola Council of Canada say Ottawa should name a new ambassador to China immediately. The CEO of Ford, Jim Hackett, took to the stage recently to talk tariffs. He says more balance and stability is needed in the world market.
I've been a CEO now for 23 years, and we never talked about tariffs in those 23 years. We had trade things, but it never really entered into the discussions in my management team. So this is a very current thing. So my exaltations to our government is you got to get us back to equilibrium. So I think the president's worked really hard at keeping the equilibrium now while he's trying to negotiate a fair exit. It's also my belief that they needed, the trade needed to be modernized. The design of it had not fallen in line with the way the world really has evolved. And it was one-sided. Ford builds more vehicles for its customers in the United States by workers in the United States than any other manufacturer, almost 80%. And we like that advantage, and this rewards that. So.
Now, speaking of Ford, the company is recalling 327,000 F-Series trucks in North America. The company says it needs to fix problems with the engine block heater cables that may cause fires. This is the second time the company has issued this recall. The automaker also recalled 874,000 Ford F-150s from 2015 to 2019 and Super Duty trucks from 2017 to 2019 because water can get into the cables, causing corrosion. Ford says it knows of 2 fires in Canada and 1 in the United States that could be related to the problem. Orders and deliveries of Boeing 737 MAX jet plunged in the first quarter as the plane was grounded following a second deadly crash in March. Boeing says it has received no new orders for the MAX plane last month. It took 29 net orders for 737s in the first 3 months of the year, but it appeared that only 10 of those involved the MAX. In the first quarter of last year, Boeing took 122 orders for 737s, including 112 for the MAX. Now, here's a look at today's markets. Recapping one of our top stories this hour, the Alberta election is less than a week away, and the latest polls put support for the UCP at 48.5%, while the NDP is at 37.8%. The Alberta Party has garnered 8.5% of support, and the Liberals are distant fourth at just 2.1%. If the election was held today, the UCP would win between 57 and 72 seats, which would put the party clear of the 44-seat threshold required for a majority government. Andrew Scheer is telling Justin Trudeau to bring it on when it comes to a threatened lawsuit. One of our regular and colorful contributors, Brian Lilly, has details next. But first, here's a look at what's happening in and around your community.
Here's your Bridge City News community calendar. Come out for an entertaining evening as Father Leonard Van Teegen Performing Arts presents an original musical production called Curse Through Time tonight and tomorrow night. at the University of Lethbridge Theatre. Enjoy a charming and magical tale of friendship, family, and the dreaded middle school experience. Doors open at 6:30 p.m. with the show starting at 7. Tickets are $10 for adults, $8 for students, and are available at the door or can be purchased at the school office. For more information, visit holyspirit.ab.ca/FLVT. The Lethbridge Chamber of Commerce is hosting a provincial election forum for both Lethbridge East and West ridings Thursday, April 11th from 6 to 8:30 p.m. at the NMAX Centre's Canadian Western Bank Lounge. Attendees will have an opportunity to meet and greet candidates before the forum begins. For more information, visit lethbridgechamber.com. Come to a Paisinki workshop and learn how to make Ukrainian Easter eggs. This workshop is being held Friday, April 12th from 5 to 9 p.m. at St. Peter and Paul Ukrainian Catholic Church in Lethbridge. For beginners to expert levels, create beautiful Ukrainian Easter eggs. Cost is $25 per person, and to pre-register, email Joanne Lavkolich at hotmail.com. And that's your Bridge City News Community Calendar.
A big story coming from Parliament Hill is Justin Trudeau's threat to sue Conservative leader Andrew Scheer. He says Scheer is lying when he says Trudeau lied to Canadians in regards to the SNC-Lavalin scandal. Joining me now via Skype from Toronto to talk about it is veteran political reporter Brian Lilly. Brian, Scheer has told Trudeau and his lawyers to bring it on. He wants Trudeau to testify under oath in an open court.
Yeah, it was kind of a strange reaction to a lawsuit, but they've spent the past several days in question period taunting the Prime Minister and other Liberals to let's get it started. Let's get this lawsuit underway. Well, you know, Trudeau was absent on Monday from Parliament Hill. He took a personal day. He likes those. On Tuesday, his first chance reporters got an opportunity to ask him, why are you threatening to sue the opposition leader? And he said, well, we can't have politicians lying to Canadians. And my thought was, well, what else are they going to do then? Look, we all joke about politicians lying, but it was a ridiculous line from Trudeau because of the number of times his story has changed on the SNC-Lavalin affair, Hal. If you go back to the beginning, of course, the first time this story broke, I was there. I listened to the Prime Minister in person say the allegations that he had pressured the Attorney General to basically throw the case again for SNC-Lavalin and bribery and corruption charges. The allegations that he had pressured her to do so, completely false. Okay, later on, well, yeah, we pressured her, but it was okay pressure. And but she never said she didn't like it. Okay, well, she did, but we see it differently. The guy's story has changed so many times, and he is threatening to sue the opposition leader, saying, "You can't lie about me." Apparently only Justin Trudeau can lie about Justin Trudeau. I don't know what to make of it when his story has changed time and time again.
Jane Philpott says by Trudeau kicking her and Jody Wilson-Raybould out of the Liberal caucus, Trudeau broke the law. Can you explain?
So there was a bill passed in the dying days of the Parliament before the last election called the Reform Act, and it was a series of reforms to how caucuses should operate. Now, I'm not sure that I agree with all of it. I don't like the idea of Parliament or the Speaker being involved in deciding who's in a caucus and who's not, but it didn't contain something that an awful lot of MPs had been calling for a long time. You can't kick an MP out of caucus unless there's a vote of the caucus. The caucus has to decide who's a member and who's not. It just can't be the leader saying, you're out of here. Well, they did not hold a vote of caucus. Justin Trudeau says, well, we had regional caucuses, and all the chairs of the regional caucuses said they wanted Jody Wilson-Raybould and Jane Philpott gone. That's not what the law says. So Jane Philpott has asked the Speaker to rule in her favor. I'm not sure the Speaker will, but it is an interesting question here. I just think that it should be the way that things operate. And I've said this time and again. We've said it recently here in Ontario. Doug Ford kicked out a longtime PC MPP out of his caucus, Randy Hillier. I didn't agree with that. I think that, regardless of party, it should be the caucus that decides who's a member, and it shouldn't just be the whim of any particular leader.
Now, most of Philpott's riding association has quit as members of the Liberal executive. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, so there's 16-member executive, and this past Monday they held a meeting. 10 of them resigned. Two of them are going to stick around to help with the next campaign. Some don't know what they're going to do, but 10 just said we can't back another candidate. Of course, this was Jane Philpott's Liberal Riding Association. It's no longer her Liberal Riding Association because Justin Trudeau kicked her out of caucus. So 10 of the 16 said, well, we're not going to back the next person. There's a few reasons this is important. One, how this just keeps the story going. It's another thread in this ongoing story that's been dogging the Prime Minister for more than 2 months now. And it keeps people talking about it locally, nationally, like we are right now, regionally. And it's not a good news story for the Prime Minister. Secondly, these are the volunteers that make elections run for every party. You need the soldiers on the ground. Yes, the big brains in the war room and the national campaign are incredibly important. But you still need people that will hammer signs into someone's front lawn, that will pick somebody up to go and vote, that will identify the vote when they go door knocking and say, oh, Mr. Roberts, good to see you. Can you tell us who you'll be supporting? And then they mark it down, and then they know where their vote is. They know where to get their vote out. These are the people to do that. And 10 of the 16 just said, we're out of here. We're not participating in the next election. That's bad news in a suburban Toronto riding that can easily flip back to the Conservatives come October.
In Alberta, we have the provincial election coming up April 16th. Brian, NDP leader Rachel Notley is calling for Trudeau senators to throw away the tanker ban bill.
Yeah, this is something that everyone in Alberta should be supporting. Justin Trudeau, of course, came to power promising he would be the prime minister that based all of his policies on science, on facts, on evidence. And he wants a tanker ban enforced in law off of BC's west coast. Well, that would be detrimental to the Alberta oil industry. It's part of what killed off Northern Gateway. I can tell you every day, there are oil tankers going up and down that coast through those very same waters, Hal. And they're going between Alaska and California, between Alaska and Washington State. And some of that oil ends up in British Columbia, by the way, in Vancouver via Washington State. So it's a bit hypocritical for the government to say we couldn't possibly have tankers off BC's west coast when there already are tankers. And for people that want to see it as fun, it's just like the website you can go on to track where your loved one's flight is. There's a similar thing for marine ships, and you can see how many tankers are in those waters. Fascinating to watch. So good on Premier Notley for calling for this. Maybe she should have been doing it earlier when she wasn't, about a week away from being in danger of losing the premiership. But as I said, this is the type of bill that everyone in Alberta should be behind.
You know, it's interesting when you mentioned Alaska. Alberta Party leader Steve Mandel here has gone on record saying that we should build a pipeline north through Alaska. He says that way we'll get it to market a lot easier than having to go south. Now, there have been some changes to the asylum laws which were contained in the budget bill. Brian, refugee advocates are really not that happy about it. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, they're not happy, but taxpayers across the country should be. The proposal, and this was not something that I noticed in covering the budget document, but the budget bill is always a bit different than the very political document you get. And of course, last year we had the deferred prosecution agreement slipped into the budget bill. There's always some humdinger in there, something that isn't really a financial matter. So last year it was deferred prosecution, which is related to SNC, which is dogging the government. This year, it's saying if you've already claimed asylum in another country, you can't turn around and try and claim asylum in Canada. It's similar to the Safe Third Country Agreement we have with the United States. It's an attempt to stop refugee shopping. And this is supposed to be an accepted norm internationally because you don't want people that are not bona fide refugees going from one country to the next. Oh, I'm a refugee, let me in. It's an abuse of the system. The refugee system is there for people that are fleeing war, persecution, whose lives are actually in danger, not someone that's looking for a better economic opportunity. I get wanting to be an economic migrant. I happen to be the son of two economic migrants. A lot of my family members, economic migrants that came to Canada for the opportunity. But you had to do it in a very specific way. We didn't show up and say, hey, we're refugees. I know people that have come to this country as refugees, be it very recently or people that came after the Second World War, people born in displaced persons camps. That's who the system's for. It's not for people that just simply want a better life. So kudos to the Liberal government on doing this. We'll see if they follow through because they are getting a lot of flack and a lot of pushback from people that would normally vote for them on this. But of course, they've been hearing from an awful lot of taxpayers about the uncontrolled border, so they're trying to find the balance there.
A recent report says we can expect some foreign interference in the next federal election. The report is also putting the spotlight on the risks of not having more robust cybersecurity for social media platforms.
Yeah, I'm a little bit worried about some of these reports that are coming out, Hal, because they seem to be a little bit political in nature. And I don't want the government using the very real threat of foreign interference to try and say, oh, well, if the Conservatives win, it's because of foreign interference. Look, we had foreign interference in the last federal election. It helped the Liberals win. It's called groups like the Tides Foundation and the Oaks Foundation funding places like Lead Now and the Dogwood Initiative. Lead Now says they targeted 29 ridings held by the Conservatives and wanted to flip them to Liberal or NDP. They claim they were successful in 25 of them. They were taking foreign money in the lead up to the election campaign. So don't tell me there wasn't foreign interference last time. The second part is this attempt to always make it sound partisan. When you look at the reports, the early reports into foreign interference in the American election, the Russian and Chinese bots that were being used, often their goal was not to support one side or the other, but rather to sow discord and distrust in the system. That's what we really have to be worried about. We have to be worried about the American money coming in, but we also have to be worried about these attempts to undermine the system from places like China or Russia.
In the 2015 federal election, we were told a Trudeau government was going to make UN peacekeeping a major part of our foreign policy. Now, as the first mandate ends, Canada's looking to wind down its meager mission, Brian.
Yeah, we're looking to get out of Mali, and this is a surprise to me. The government had it took years for them to even get Canadian troops to Mali. We were promised that it was going to be done now. Canada's back. We heard that time and again shortly after the election. And then they were dragging their feet for so long, the United Nations was becoming annoyed with the Trudeau government. They finally committed about 600 troops, some helicopters, no frontline troops. So I don't think that we're going to be getting the praise that Justin Trudeau was looking for on this. He's not going to get the political capital. But I don't think Canadians are going to mind. UN peacekeeping has changed since the days of walking the Green Line in Cyprus and nobody getting killed. It's vastly different now. It's much more dangerous than it used to be. And Canadians, after the long multilateral mission in Afghanistan, just don't have the stomach for it at the moment.
Brian, online scamming is commonplace these days, whether it's a romance scam, CRA scams. We're getting text messages on social media or through email. But a city official in Ottawa, who's the city's treasurer, wire transferred more than $130,000 to email scammers. Let's talk about that.
Yeah, that's why this is so shocking, is that she's the city treasurer and yet was duped into transferring a massive sum of money. I mean, think of what you could do with $130,000. And we're always warned by our IT professionals and organizations, large and small. We're warned by governments. Don't click on links from people you don't know. Beware of those texts from the bank saying, oh, click here or your account is in danger. How on earth did this happen? So an awful lot of headaches for this woman, but it goes to show you that even people at high-level jobs, highly intelligent, highly educated, can still be duped by these things. $130,000 gone from the coffers of the city of Ottawa. That's a big hit for taxpayers. As a longtime Ottawa taxpayer, I can tell you it's going to hurt.
I can think of a very nice car I could buy with $130,000. One of our regular contributors, Brian Lilly, joining me via Skype from Toronto. Thanks again, Brian.
Thank you, Hal.
It seems hard to believe, but it's been 25 years since the tragedy of the Rwanda genocide. Joining me now to talk about this via Skype from London, Ontario, is Alison Alley, who's the President-elect of Compassion Canada. Alison, welcome to Bridge City News.
Thank you, Hal. Great to be with you.
Now, our society does have a tendency to forget things. Many young people don't even remember the Holocaust, the tragedy that happened there, over 6 million Jews who died. Now, for those who do not remember, remind our viewers what took place in Rwanda 25 years ago.
Yeah, absolutely. So 25 years ago was the onset of what we now know as the Rwandan genocide. And genocide, for your younger viewers, would be considered one of the worst crimes against humanity. It's this planned mass killing of racial, ethnic, or religious groups. And so the Rwandan genocide in particular was a state-led genocide that targeted what's called the Tutsi ethnic group that was started by Hutu nationalists. And I would say what made this genocide so brutal is that it ended up being neighbor against neighbor. So normal day, everyday people were encouraged to kill their neighbors with radio broadcasts. And that happened. It went on for about 100 days, from April 7th until the middle of July. And in that time, nearly 1 million people were brutally killed by everyday citizens.
That is incredible. So what does life in Rwanda look like today?
Well, a lot has happened since that time. What I would say is the impact just had ripple effects, from generations through this country. So survivors were physically and sociologically damaged, families were destroyed, people were displaced, and really pushed into deeper poverty. Today, what I would say is I was there about a couple years ago. And while, again, you can see the ripple effects of the genocide and the poverty and AIDS and this orphan crisis still on display, in many senses, there's been incredible progress. So you can see if you visit that there is this concentrated effort in every aspect of society, whether it be churches or government or NGOs, that are working together to combat this genocide ideology, this sense of one group versus the other and the harm that can come from that. So there's been huge progress that's been made.
So Allison, what kind of an impact has the Christian community had in Rwanda over the past 25 years?
Yeah, pretty significant. So Compassion was there before the Rwandan genocide. We had a presence in the country in the early 1980s. And Compassion's ministry is one that we partner exclusively with local churches. So we have 400 church partners across Rwanda that are currently serving over 90,000 kids living in poverty. And I say that because Compassion and our ministry approach gives us a front row a front row seat, I should say, to the role of the church and the impact that they're making in communities. So the church has had an incredible impact in this country, helping people, I would say, first of all, come to experience firsthand the peace that surpasses all understanding, that can only be found in the person of Jesus, and to begin to accept his reconciling role and to live out that reconciling in their own life with their own neighbors.
So how has Compassion Canada specifically been actively involved in the humanitarian crisis in Rwanda?
Yeah, so our model is one where we develop kids holistically. So we don't just help them physically, but we work with them cognitively, socio-emotionally, and spiritually, of course. And so in the aftermath of the genocide, it became evident to us that trauma counseling and initiatives that really helped promote both personal and interpersonal healing would be essential in this context. And so we worked with kids and did exactly that, offered them a therapy with skilled specialists and really specialized counseling to help them begin to unpack and process what they went through or what their parents went through. Because I think what's important to understand is, many people might say, well, Compassion, you deal with kids. And many of the kids that would remember the genocide are now adults. But as I said, the genocide had this ripple effect where there were, kids living in foster home that were ripped away from their parents. And HIV/AIDS became quite prevalent in this country because rape, if you can imagine, was used as a sword. It was really an unbelievable part of the genocide. And so many kids nowadays are still losing parents to AIDS and are having to grapple with that type of systemic impact of the genocide.
Now, can you share the story of Christine? It talks specifically about reconciliation and forgiveness.
Yeah. Christine's story, like many of them that I've heard, is just heart-wrenching initially and still heart-wrenching. So Christine was fleeing the violence with her mom, was 4 years old, being carried in her mother's arm when all of a sudden her mom realized that the end was imminent for her. And so she put Christine down, told her to run. Christine was paralyzed in fear. You can imagine 4 years old when another family member came and scooped her up. Well, Christine's story was one that as she turned aside, she saw her mom die right in front of her eyes and ended up having to deal with that tragedy at a really young age. So 1 year later, her aunt signed her up for the compassion program. And so she began to experience a sense of family and community and belonging. And for her, her understanding of God's love was really significant in her life. And so she worked over time to forgive her mom and her extended family's murderers and was really invested in as a leader. And so today, she's in her late 20s and she works for an organization called Save the Children as a child protection officer. And she still, has incredible dreams of becoming a minister for human rights in her country. So making a remarkable impact.
That is amazing how God can use somebody like that. Let's talk about the lack of maybe counseling in countries like areas like Rwanda, as opposed to what we have here in North America. We go through a tragedy like that. We have counseling services at our beck and call, but in a lot of other countries, that's not available.
Yeah, that's exactly right, Hal. I think the combination of a lot of the tools and resources that we receive here in Canada are publicly funded or would be an extension of our education program. And education is not readily available in Rwanda. And, publicly funded services are not readily available. And when you start to unpack the complexity of poverty, you begin to understand that human capital and skill development is not as often applied in those contexts. So to have access to such a specialized skill like a counselor would be incredibly rare. But that's where, as I said, compassion can come in with our resources and our connections, and first of all, train our staff and our volunteers to be able to tackle some of these root and complex issues, while also bringing in specialized from perhaps more urban areas into rural areas to be able to spend time with kids there.
So what work is still left to be done in the Rwanda region?
Yeah, I mean, there's complex ripple effects. There is ripped apart families still. There would be extreme poverty. There is still a lack of healthcare, a lack of education. There's been even infrastructure that needs to be rebuilt because the nature of the genocide was one where, people came with flames and torches and burnt down churches and institutions and schools. And so, again, lots of progress has been made, but more progress needs to happen in all of those areas. But what I would say is that God is building up a generation of leaders who are in real time facilitating that change. They're working in the government, they're working in the social sector, they're working in education to really bring about a lot of these changes.
Now, Allison, you have another story of a life completely turned around against all odds. Tell me about Method. What happened to him and his family?
Yeah, absolutely. So Method again was a young man now, but a very young boy at the time of the genocide. And he and his family initially started hearing warning signs on the radio that they needed to stay in their home and protect themselves. But over time, what happened to them was not unlike what happened to a lot of people. They started hearing shouts, gunshots, warnings that they needed to flee. And so they did exactly that. They were hiding in the bushes, if you can imagine, and later living in and out of a swamp. So they would go into the swamp during the day to hide and come out at nighttime. And his tragic story was one that he lost his parents, he lost his 3 siblings, and he had this culminating event where, as the opposition moved in on him, he and his aunt threw themselves into the river, if you can imagine, to end their lives, thinking it would be quicker that way. But God spared his life. But he was left with deep wounds and a deep sense of bitterness and rage, where he wanted revenge on these people who did this horrific crime. But his story, again, is one where just a year later, he started at the Compassion Program, where he was known, loved, and protected. He was invested in by a sponsor who began to tell him that God loves him. And he started crying out to this God, asking him to reveal himself and to allow him to experience some sort of peace. And he did in time and began to take steps in some of the efforts towards reconciliation and forgiveness. And his story is that he was invested in over time and is now a successful businessman that owns a tourist business. And part of his testimony and story is that he made the explicit choice to hire Hutus, which was the ethnic group that really propagated this genocide and impacted his family and killed so many lives. And so people that were once his enemy, he's now working alongside in close proximity and deciding to build unity and build relationship.
I understand that Canadians have played a vital role in the positive steps impacting major lives there. Can you share a bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we would never be able to serve the 90,000 children in our ministry without the loving support of sponsors here in Canada. So we have thousands and thousands of sponsors who said yes to a child and sponsor them in a way that allows them to develop holistically, to understand God's love for them. And they also play a critical role in investing in their relationship and encouraging them. But more than that, quite specifically in Rwanda, is we still are providing this vital trauma counseling because, as I said, the ramifications of the genocide are far reaching and generational. And so we have a handful, hundreds of Canadians who are faithfully supporting ongoing trauma counseling and donating to that really important cause.
So can you share with our viewers how they can actively participate in changing children's lives one person at a time through Compassion Canada?
Absolutely. Well, you can go to our website, compassion.ca, and you can learn all about our holistic child development program and see all the kids around the world, not just in Rwanda, but in 25 countries who are waiting for a sponsor like them. They can also go to compassion.ca/Rwanda25 to read more stories and to understand how they can get involved specifically in this trauma education and awareness and training.
Allison, can you also share the story of Christian? What was his experience like?
Yeah, Christian's story was that he lost his father in the genocide, a father that he was very close with. And he ended up being raised by his mother exclusively and ended up having a pretty cruel stepfather in his life. And this ended up being a really tragic event for him where he felt this loss of identity, this loss of purpose. And for him, when he became involved in the Compassion program, he had mentors and tutors there, male mentors, that really invested him and helped fill that void of that male leader and example in his life. He would say that he began to discover his identity in Christ and who he was in him that gave him a greater sense of purpose than he could have otherwise had. So in time, he did forgive his stepfather. He has reconciled with his stepfather. And today, Hal, you'll appreciate this. He is a presenter and a news anchor on a Christian radio and television program. Yeah, and so he is sharing his testimony and working to help other people experience that same kind of hope and wholeness that he experienced.
That is amazing. What a true success story. So Allison, any final thoughts to encourage people to do their part in forgiveness, reconciliation, and compassion?
Yeah, well, you know, it's difficult to think about the Rwandan genocide without recognizing, I would say broadly, that this doesn't come out of nowhere. It comes from seeds of division and hate. And I think it's often important for us to remember this, what I would say, this main motif in Scripture, which is God's universal love for all people. That God's love is one that, regardless of race or religion or gender or socioeconomic status, that he came to, as it says in Ephesians 2:14, to be our peace. He is the God who took two groups and made one and destroyed barriers and dividing walls of hostility. So I think for us as Christ followers, let's remember, the mandate of Christ to be people who reconcile and live that out in our daily lives. And as part of that, I think for us as Canadians to recognize that we have been given much, and God calls us to have a spirit of generosity to help those who may not have what we have. So I would encourage every Canadian to do their part to help those who are living in poverty and those who are still dealing with the ramifications of the genocide, as I said, by either sponsoring a child or donating specifically to the trauma care.
To whom much is given, much is required. Allison Alley, President-elect with Compassion Canada, thanks a lot for joining me from London, Ontario.
My pleasure, Hal.
On behalf of all of us here at BCN, I'm Hal Roberts. God bless and have a